Hello lands, beekeepers, and Wild Hives Community. This is Rob and Son on the other side of the camera as usual, and we are Wild Hives. This is part number 3 of a 4-part series on moisture in your hive. Our first one was about moisture and the benefits of having moisture. The second one was about the first part of your 2-part system, your hive system, which is the body of your hive. And this video is about the lid, and our final video will be about getting inside the hive and talking about some specifics about how to set some things up inside the hive. So the lid is what we're talking about today. And the way we build our hives, we use a fully insulated lid, no upper ventilation, one single entrance, and we allow the bees to maintain the heat and humidity and CO2 level inside the hive without us gassing that off or releasing that in any way. And that's what we're trying to do is mimic a tree. So our hives try to get as close to a tree as possible. We know that a tree has probably 4 to 6 inches of wood on the sides. So that's an R4 to 6 or a little bit more. Our hives are an R8 on the sides and the bottom. The top of a tree cavity would be almost infinite amount of R because it's just a tree growing higher and higher. But we want to have at least twice as much insulation in our lid as we have in the walls. And the reason we do that is so that as convection processes are happening inside the colony here, that the heat is coming up to a nice warm roof. And as the sides, as they get farther away from the colony, the sides will get a little cooler, and that causes that convection current, and then condensation will form at the dew point, which will be lower on the walls below the bees. And that's what we want to happen. That's what happens at a tree. That's what we want to happen in here. Now, I know some of you might have ventilated lids, so we'll talk about that as well, but we really believe in a fully insulated what might be considered a condensing hive by some people in using Langstroth, but we love our fully insulated lid. And if I flip this over, you can see that it is a well-insulated lid. It's got almost 3 inches of insulation. We've got an R15. We put a wood surface on the inside, and this is lessons learned, and hopefully I'm going to help you not learn the lesson we had to learn, which is when we first started insulating our lids, we just put insulation in. And most of us have some level of ants that love to get on top of the head rails, and whether little small ants or big black ants, usually the little small ants, they love insulation. Insulation in a lid where it's nice and warm, where it's also temperature controlled even in the summer. They love making homes in this. So you'll open up your lid and you'll find little holes all in your insulation, and you'll find out that even if you try to shake the ants out, they just keep coming and coming and coming out of your insulation. So we took care of that. All of our hives that we sell to our customer have a piece of wood on the inside. This is a 1/4 inch piece of utility board that we mount inside. Now, let's talk about you who might have a ventilated lid. Now let's say you wanted to go to a fully insulated lid. If you have a ventilated lid, you usually have a rail system all the way around that holds the lid off the hive. And I would suggest packing your lid with insulation and then using like a utility board like this, a 1/4 inch, and actually attaching it to that rail that goes around all the way around here. And this is one of our really old lids. This is exactly what I did. As you can see, this used to be a ventilated lid. And so what I did was I caulked the holes, sealed that off, filled it with insulation, and then put the board in. So this is something, a real simple project you can do for yours. Don't feel like you have to build a whole nother lid. Don't do that. Just use what you have. I'm a really big believer in using what you have. And so just retrofit your lid if you want to make it fully insulated. In this type of system, also, this wood lays flat on this these head rails. This is really, really important. If you have a lid that you put insulation in, but there's a 3/4 gap because of that rail system around there that's holding the insulation off your head rails. It can cause convection currents to happen across your head rails and actually draw the damp air into the open area over here. So some of you who have just packed in insulation above the rail system may find that in this open space over here, that moisture the currents have brought it down into this area, it has cooled, and then it has actually formed droplets on top of this lid. Now, in that type of a system, if you have a, let me go ahead and put this down. Sorry about that. If you have a divider board, okay, like I do, and you may or may not have a piece of insulation on your divider board. But if you have a ventilated lid, you likely will have feet on the bottom of your divider board, which keep the divider board off the bottom. Well, that's great if you want to use a ventilated system, and if you do, that's up to you. But that would hold the board up and allow the moisture to go underneath and come into this space here, and then out the holes. So what's the impact of that? Well, generally, if you have that type of a system, you'll come back in the spring and you'll find that right here on the underside of your lid, that because the moisture and the heat came up on the outside of this, you've got mold right here. You may also find that in this area here, you might have some puddles of water in this area right here. And that's because it cooled on the lid, underside of your ventilated lid, and it dripped down into this area. If you have a space here, and it could also drip from underneath your lid onto your head rails. If you have insulation, even if you have a 3/4 space here, it still can cool on the underside of the insulation and drip, or at least it'll convex over the side, cool on the underside here, and drip down in here. And so you have puddles, you might have some mold here on the underside. That's some of the things. And if you're seeing these situations, the first thing I would suggest you doing is taking the feet off and putting that divider board all the way down. So what's that going to do? That's going to keep all the moisture inside the colony. So one, you don't have any moisture coming out in here. But if the lid isn't sitting flat on top of here, you still got the possible problem of moisture and heat coming off the head rails and going down into this area and still causing some moisture here. So if you're going to insulate, you really need to put your insulation, whether you're using a sheet of insulation, you're using a pillow, a wool blanket, a lid that's insulated, whatever you're doing, it needs to sit flat on the head rails. Any space, just like space in your walls, construction rules now, you can't have open spaces inside of your walls. It needs to be fully insulated, right down on top of the head rails. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep that moisture and that heat, and it's going to keep it down against the head rails and hopefully keep it down on the underside of those head rails. So I hope this has been a little helpful. So one, if you have an insulated lid, make sure the insulation of the lid sits flat on the head rails. Two, if you don't have an insulated lid, if you have a ventilated lid in the winter, make sure you put that board all the way down to the bottom, and make sure that if you're adding insulation in the fall, that you're putting that insulation right on top. That's where your wool pillow would go, that's where your wool blanket would go, and by insulating the lid but creating a space, you really haven't helped yourself. Okay? The other thing, and the thing I'll leave you with, is this. Bees, as we know, don't heat this whole cavity. Bees are worried about heating themselves. This cavity here will eventually get as cold as the outside air. Not because air is coming in here, but because the cold will eventually transfer through the insulation wall, and this will become as cold here as out here. So just keep that in mind, that we have a very cold condition here. And so because of that, I strongly suggest using a type of reflective insulation. This is an R6. It's thin, it's easy for me to use, it's not really big. I can tape the edges, which is really important with bees, because if bees get to those edges, they're going to chew that up like crazy. They love chewing it up, and it'll end up being dust, pink dust inside here. So get yourself a sheet of insulation, hopefully something around an R6, R7, that has a reflective surface. Put that right against your divider board. Remember, your divider board, ours are 3/4. That's an R1. Another R6 to 7. I've got a system here that's an R7 to an R8. And what that's doing is it's R8 in the walls, R8 in the floors, R8 here, and R15 that sits straight on top here. I've just created and tried to mimic a tree inside of a tree cavity by doing that. The board is all the way down. It doesn't let the moisture into this area. And I depend on the bees instead of my wisdom. I depend on the wisdom of the bees and their evolutionary experience over thousands and thousands and thousands of years to know what to do with this space. They can handle this. They need the water. And all we need to do is build a hive system that allows them to experience what they would experience in a tree. This is what they're just genetically triggered. They have genetic triggers to do simple things. It's like we don't teach birds how to make nests. How do they do that? They just instinctively know how to build a nest. Bees are the same way. They know how to use a space that is very similar to what they instinctively are expecting. And that's what we're trying to create. So if you have a lid, if it's ventilated, make sure that you're putting your insulation straight down on top of this, whether it's a pillow, a wool blanket, or a solid foam, which we've used in the past. Also, make sure that the divider board is all the way down so that it doesn't cause moisture to come out here, because trying to vent out through these holes in the winter, you will always get some type of mold here, and you will always get some level of water here. If you don't want that, then you want to do what I'm saying. I strongly suggest fully insulating your lid and making sure that this surface sits flat on top of your head rails. And now the head rails are an R1 themselves, and I got an R15 in the lid, and it's connected, it's touching. So it's that much insulation above the bees. Okay? So hopefully this has been helpful. Our next one will be about looking on the inside and things to do inside, which we talked a little bit about, but there's some more I want to share with you that you will probably find in the spring, and I want to give you some heads up on that and hopefully help you next fall as you're prepping for your winter bees. Okay? So thanks again, Wild Hives.